You're standing at the edge of a frozen slope in the northern Ural Mountains, February 1959, and something has gone horribly wrong. 9 experienced hikers, all in their 20s, all skilled outdoorsmen and women, have just done something that makes absolutely no sense. They've cut their way out of their tent, not through the door, through the fabric itself, from the inside, with knives, and then they've run out into sub-zero temperatures, into a howling dark, wearing socks, or barely dressed, some without shoes at all. They will not survive the night. When searchers finally find them weeks later, the scene raises more questions than it answers. Some bodies show no external trauma at all. Others have injuries so severe that a medical examiner will later compare them to being hit by a car. One woman is missing her tongue, and oddly, several of the hikers' clothes test positive for radiation. For over 60 years, this single case has spawned theories involving Soviet weapons tests, secret military experiments, infrasound weapons, even Yetis and UFOs. It's become one of the most famous unsolved mysteries on Earth. But here's the thing. What if it was never actually a mystery? What if the real explanation isn't a cover-up, but something the investigators in 1959 simply didn't have the tools to see? Let's rebuild that night, piece by piece, because the truth turns out to be way stranger and way more human than any conspiracy. First, who were these people? This wasn't a random group of amateurs. They were students and graduates from the Ural Polytechnical Institute, led by a 23-year-old named Igor Dyatlov. And this was a serious expedition, a Grade 3 hiking certification climb, the highest difficulty level in the Soviet system at the time. These were people who understood cold, understood snow, understood how to survive in brutal terrain. That's actually the most important detail in the entire case. Whatever happened to them wasn't something a beginner would panic over. It had to be something that overrode the instincts of trained mountaineers. On the night of February 1st, the group set up camp on the slope of a mountain the local Manzi people called Kolat Shiakal, which translates chillingly to Dead Mountain. Investigators later found this odd. Why camp on an exposed slope instead of moving down into the tree line for shelter? But Dyatlov likely chose the spot deliberately, to avoid losing elevation they'd need to regain the next day. It was a calculated decision, not a reckless one. And then, sometime in the night, everything falls apart. The tent is sliced open from the inside. 9 people flee downhill, into forest more than a kilometer away, in temperatures around -25 to 30 degrees Celsius. 2 of them, Krivonishenko and Doroshenko, are found first near a large cedar tree in minimal clothing, having apparently tried to build a fire. 3 more, including Dyatlov himself, are found scattered between the tree and the tent, as though they'd tried to return. And 4 more are found much later, in a ravine, buried under snow, with the most severe injuries of all. For decades, this sequence screamed something attacked them, something so terrifying that experienced hikers abandoned shelter, abandoned warmth, abandoned rational judgment, and ran into a deadly night barely clothed. That's the emotional core of the mystery. And it's exactly why people reached for aliens, secret weapons, even cryptids. Because the alternative, that nature alone did this, felt too mundane for something this horrifying. But mundane doesn't mean simple. And here's where the real answer comes in. And it's honestly more unsettling than the myths, because it's real, and it could happen again. In 2019, Russian investigators reopened the case, and more recently, a team of Swiss researchers led by Johann Gaume ran detailed physical simulations of the slope, the snowpack, and the night's conditions. What they found strongly supports something called a slab avalanche, but not the kind you're picturing. Not a roaring wall of snow crashing down a mountainside. Something smaller, quieter, and in some ways scarier because of how invisible it is. Here's what likely happened. The hikers cut into the slope to level their tent platform, which, unknowingly, removed some of the support beneath the snow above them. Add in warm winds, known as katabatic winds, which can rapidly redistribute snow, and add stress to a slope, and you get a delayed release, not immediately, but hours later, while everyone is asleep. A slab of dense snow, not huge, maybe a couple 100 kilograms per square meter, breaks free and slides a short distance downhill, directly onto the tent. This explains almost everything that seemed impossible. It explains why they cut their way out. Instead of using the door, the entrance was likely buried or blocked, and in the panic of an unknown crushing weight, falling on you in pitch darkness, in your sleep, cutting through canvas is faster than fumbling for an exit. It explains why some hikers had no external injuries. A relatively small, low-speed slab won't necessarily break bones on impact, but it can absolutely disorient, injure, and terrify people badly enough to trigger a genuine flight response, especially if they believed a larger, more dangerous slide might follow. And it explains the horrifying injuries found on the 4 bodies in the ravine. GOM's simulations, using crash test data from actual snow slab impacts, showed that the force required to crush ribs and skulls, the way investigators observed, doesn't need a massive avalanche. It matches almost exactly what a small slab, moving at low speed, but with immense compressive weight, would do to a body lying on hard, uneven ground. This is very likely why the original medical examiner made that haunting comparison to a car crash, because in terms of blunt compressive trauma, it basically was one, just made of snow instead of steel. What about the missing tongue? That one sounds like conspiracy fuel, but it's actually one of the more explainable details. Bodies exposed for weeks in the elements, partially submerged in a snowmelt stream in that ravine, undergo predictable decomposition, and small, soft tissues, like the tongue, are among the first things scavenging animals or natural decay processes affect. Grim, yes. Mysterious, no. And the radiation. Turns out one of the group members, Krivonishenko, worked at a facility associated with radioactive materials processing, and thorium-based camping lantern mantles were common at the time, both entirely plausible, mundane sources for trace contamination, no secret weapons test required. So if this explanation lines up so well, why did it take 60 years for us to believe it? Because in 1959, investigators didn't have modern avalanche modeling, didn't have crash test biomechanics data, and frankly, didn't have the luxury of admitting uncertainty in a Soviet system that demanded clean, closed case files. The original report vaguely blamed a compelling natural force, and then the file was sealed. Vague answers, in the absence of tools to prove them, are exactly the soil conspiracy theories grow in. Here's what makes this reframe so much more powerful than any UFO or secret experiment story. The real explanation doesn't make the tragedy less frightening. It makes it more real. 9 capable, careful people did nothing wrong. They followed sound judgment, made a defensible camping decision, and were still killed by an avalanche so subtle it left barely a visible trace by morning, hidden by wind, snowfall, and time, undetectable to searchers who arrived weeks later, looking for the wrong kind of evidence. That's the true horror of Dyatlov Pass. Not aliens, not government cover-ups, just the terrifying realization that sometimes the mountain doesn't need to send a warning at all. Sometimes the ground beneath you can simply decide, quietly, in the middle of the night, that tonight is the night it moves. And no amount of experience or preparation or knowledge can always tell you when that moment is coming. So maybe the real mystery was never what killed them. Maybe it was just how long it took us to be humble enough to listen to the snow.